While smartphone cameras have come a long way since the mid-2000s, they've played a huge role in the recent explosion of interest in photography, but they still don't completely replace a dedicated camera. And despite how ubiquitous the smartphone is when it comes to important moments, you don't see professionals reaching for their iPhone. While I can't think of anyone I know who doesn't have a smartphone, I still get asked quite often if I can recommend a great camera. While the question doesn't seem that difficult, unfortunately the answer is a little bit more complicated, because everyone has different intentions and expectations when it comes to a camera. So in this video, I'm going to go over all the things to consider when purchasing a camera, and then I'm going to highlight a few cameras that I think will get you to a good jumping off point to do a little bit of research on your own and hopefully find the camera that's perfect for you. So I hope you'll stick around while we dive on into this. When someone asks me to recommend a good camera, the first thing I ask them is what type of photos they plan on taking. Understanding what type of photos someone takes is paramount in understanding what camera would be ideal for them. There are tons of cameras out there, and finding that sweet spot takes a little bit of research. So for example, let's say you're shooting landscapes or architectural photos. You'll probably want to focus a little bit more on resolution and dynamic range. But on the other hand, if you shoot sports or wildlife, you're going to be a little bit more interested in the autofocus system and subject tracking, for instance. When you're shooting action-based photos, much more is demanded of the camera in terms of speed and processing power than when shooting landscapes. Now, big brands such as Canon, Nikon, Sony, and Fuji all make great cameras that appeal to a wide range of photographers. It just comes down to preference. Canon and Nikon probably have the most history and are more common to see in the hands of professionals, but Sony and Fuji have made enormous strides over the past 10 years, with Sony actually taking over the #1 spot for camera sales. While I intended to primarily focus on still photography, I didn't want to gloss over the big demand for a camera as a tool for shooting video. There are a ton of hybrid shooters out there, both amateur and professional, who will likely be looking for a stills camera that can also shoot video. Now let's take a look at the different types of cameras out there. There's DSLR and mirrorless cameras. Now DSLRs are basically the digital version of the 35mm SLR. SLR stands for single lens reflex. Now this style of camera works by using a mirror which sits at a 45-degree angle and reflects the light from the lens up to the optical viewfinder. But because the image coming from the lens is inverted, the optical viewfinders contain a 5-sided prism that inverts the image so we see it right side up. Mirrorless cameras use an electronic viewfinder, or EVF, which contains a small LCD to display the live view image in the viewfinder, and thus no need for the mirror, hence the name mirrorless. Electronic viewfinders have one big advantage, in that they can see the exposure result while composing the shot, and there's a lot more info that can be displayed in the viewfinder. It also has advantages when shooting video that the optical viewfinders lack, such as zebras, histograms, focus peaking, and audio levels, to name a few. Those are all things that camera operators have come to appreciate. Optical viewfinders are preferable to many, including sports photographers, because of the unfiltered analog display, which yields a brighter and sharper image, and there's no lag. This is something sports photographers depend on when capturing fast action because they're anticipating timing. And when an Olympic shooter is looking through the viewfinder all day at the games, they're conserving battery power that a mirrorless system wouldn't be able to do. DSLRs contain more dedicated buttons, whereas mirrorless cameras are more menu-driven, which means more hunting to change or select your settings. Okay, let's move on to budget. It's not hard to spend a lot of money in this field because there's always something you need or want. Gear acquisition syndrome is when photographers are constantly salivating over gear they think they need or want, and always feel like if they just had this particular camera, lens, bag, or light, that their photos would improve, they would land better jobs, or make more money. We all know this is not true, but we all get caught up. But understand that photography, not unlike many tech-oriented hobbies or professions, can be very expensive, and you need to be sensible about what you actually need. So do your research and make a list of the things that are a must. Now, having said that, I'm going to highlight a few cameras that I think offer quite a lot of features, and then hopefully you can do your own research by heading over to dpreview.com and checking out their buying guides. Now, they have tons of information to compare and contrast many cameras as well as video reviews. There's a great website that I recommend for finding out all the specifics about cameras you're interested in. They have photos and spec sheet comparisons for you to determine what camera is perfect for you. It's called dpreview.com, and they've been around for years and are a great resource. There are so many great cameras out there that I think it's honestly a little overwhelming trying to weed through them, but I have a few cameras that I think would be great choices for a lot of people. But because everybody's different and quirky and can have really specific likes and dislikes, I'm only throwing these out there as a suggestion. These probably will be great for quite a few people, but others may want to keep searching, and I encourage that. The Fuji X-T4. This 26 megapixel mirrorless camera, just announced in February, is a great pick for many photographers. The photo quality is really impressive, as well as its video, capable of shooting up to 4K at 60p with an outstanding bitrate of 400 megabits per second. The image quality on the video is good enough for filmmakers and is more than enough for shooting the kids' soccer games. The flip-out screen is incredibly handy and is one of the most requested features from consumers. Fuji has won over a lot of fans with its film simulation modes, which is a nice throwback to those of you old enough to remember using Fujifilm. The electronic viewfinder doesn't disappoint with its nearly 4 million dot resolution, which should be excellent for composing shots as well as reviewing them in the viewfinder. This camera is a bit expensive for the hobbyist at $1,700, but it's the type of camera that will hold its own for years to come. But keep in mind, this is the price for the body only. For another $700, you can pick up the popular 18 to 55mm lens. The Canon M6 Mark II. Canon's second iteration of the M6 is my new pick because of all it offers on both the photo and video side. The M6 produces 32 megapixel photos by way of an APS-C sensor, but I imagine the video quality of the M6 should also satisfy with up to 4K 30 capture and using Canon's revered dual pixel autofocus. The small size of this camera is perfect for tucking away in a purse or backpack or just carrying in hand if need be. Now, I might mention that the battery life leaves much to be desired. This is the downside to the smaller mirrorless cameras, but you can pick up an extra battery or two for those times when you need the extra juice. For under $1,000, this is a really good pick and should be a viable option for many. One caveat to this camera is that it doesn't come with a viewfinder like most do. It's instead reserved as an option. So if you're the type that values a viewfinder over looking at the screen, like on a smartphone, then you'll want to look into purchasing that separately. At the time of this review, I did see a package on Amazon for $1,050 that included the viewfinder and the 15 to 45mm lens. The Nikon D3500. The only DSLR in my recommendation, the Nikon D3500, has a 24 megapixel sensor with decent autofocus, Bluetooth connectivity for pairing with your phone, and a small form factor which makes this DSLR more like its mirrorless counterparts. It has an impressive battery life and pleasing photo quality, especially in RAW mode. Now, while the Nikon doesn't produce 4K video, it does offer decent 1080p 60 full HD recording. This will be a perfect camera to take to the kids' softball practice or soccer game, and certainly small enough for the trips out of town. The price won't raise any eyebrows, but the images will produce many smiles. At the time of this review, the price was $400 for the body, or just under $550 for the kit with the 18 to 55mm lens. Alright, that'll do it for this one. Thanks so much for coming by and checking out my first video on the channel devoted to photography. I really look forward to doing more of these videos in the future, so if you found value in this video, please give a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Also, I'd love to know what you thought of the 3 cameras that I picked and what cameras you'd suggest. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Now, while I intended to focus on professional as well as amateur, and while I intended to focus primarily on still photography, I didn't want to gloss over the having said that, I'm gonna